Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Ask a Property Manager. This is episode number 86 and today is September 1st, 2021. We're coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the federal eviction moratorium being struck down. We'll talk about some painting tips for your rental. We'll answer some questions from housing providers around the country and so much more. Before we jump into that, we are going to plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on Facebook. You can catch those replays on Facebook as well as on YouTube the same day. Don't forget about our Instagram. We post content there that doesn't make it onto the other platforms. And last but not least, don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. The current episode is talking about what to include in a tenant reference letter, when to return a security deposit, and dealing with neighbors who insist on using your yard for their dog's duty. So don't miss out on that. New episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drop every other Thursday morning, anywhere podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. We're going to jump right into the news of the day here, starting with this article from the Washington Post. This is from the tail end of last week. Supreme Court strikes down the CDC eviction moratorium despite Delta's rise. We're going to go ahead and jump right in here. Let's see if we can increase the size of the text here just a touch. A divided Supreme Court has ended a national moratorium on evictions in parts of the country ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic, removing protections for millions of Americans who have not been able to make rent payments. A coalition of landlords and real estate trade groups in Alabama and Georgia challenged the latest extension of a moratorium imposed by CDC, issued August 3rd and intended to run through October 3rd. In an unsigned opinion released Thursday night, the Supreme Court's conservative majority agreed that the federal agency did not have the power to order such a ban. It is indisputable that the public has a strong interest in combating the spread of COVID-19 Delta variant, the majority's 8-page opinion said, but our system does not permit agencies to act unlawfully even in the pursuit of desirable ends. It is up to the Congress, not the CDC, to decide whether the public interest merits further action here. The court's 3 liberal justices dissented and said the majority's rush to end the moratorium was inappropriate and untimely. The public interest strongly favors respecting the CDC's judgment at this moment, when over 90% of counties are experiencing high transmission rates, wrote Justice Stephen Breyer, joined by Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. It was the second loss of the week for the Biden administration at the Supreme Court. Earlier, the conservative majority said the administration had to comply with a court ruling ordering it to reinstate a Trump-era policy that requires asylum seekers to wait outside the country before making their pleas. In a statement Thursday night, White House spokesman Jen Psaki said the eviction opinion meant families will face the painful impact of evictions, and communities across the country will face greater risk of exposure to COVID-19. The National Association of Realtors said the court's action was correct from both a legal standpoint and a matter of fairness. It brings an end to an unlawful policy that places financial hardship solely on the shoulders of mom-and-pop housing providers who provide nearly half of all rental housing in America, and it restores property rights in America. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. We'll come back to that in a minute. The moratorium has already been considered once by the High Court. A district judge in D.C. and several other courts around the country said in a series of rulings that powers granted to the CDC to protect public health during a pandemic did not include a ban on evictions for those who fell behind on their payments. But U.S. District Judge Dabney Friedrich stayed her most recent order so that the administration could appeal. Although the Biden administration asked the Supreme Court to preserve what it called a lawful and urgently needed response to an unprecedented public emergency, a majority of justices had already signaled agreement with Friedrich. Over the objections of the court's 4 most conservative justices, the court in June left in place a previous version of the eviction ban that was supposed to expire at the end of July. But Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh, who cast the deciding vote in that decision, also said he believed any extension of the ban would require explicit congressional action. Congress did not respond, however, and initially the Biden administration said its hands were tied. After pressure from constituent groups and the liberals in Congress, one of whom camped outside the U.S. Capitol to draw attention to the issue, the administration issued a new and slightly narrowed version of the moratorium. but even the president was fatalistic. I went ahead and did it, Biden told reporters, but here's the deal. I can't guarantee you the court won't rule that we don't have that authority, but at least we'll have the ability, if we appeal, to keep this going for a month at least, and I hope longer than that. The challengers in their brief to the court used the president's words to argue that the administration knew it was on unstable legal ground. The only plausible explanation for the extended moratorium is that it was issued in response to political pressure from Capitol Hill for the express purpose of using litigation delays to distribute more rental assistance, their brief says. Nearly a year of overreach is enough. Representative Cori Bush, Democrat, who organized the campout at the Capitol, said that Thursday that Congress needs to step up. Tonight, the Supreme Court failed to protect 11 million households across our country from violent eviction in the middle of a deadly global pandemic, Bush said in a statement, adding, Congress must act immediately to prevent mass evictions, and I am exploring every possible option. Congress originally imposed the eviction moratorium. When it expired, President Donald Trump ordered the CDC to impose one, which has been extended several times. The legal issue involves the Public Health Service Act. It gives the agency authority to make and enforce such regulations necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases, but challengers and some lower courts have reviewed the issue, say the power is limited by another provision contained within the act that lists measures such as fumigation, disinfection, sanitation, and pest extermination. The Supreme Court majority agreed. It strains credulity to believe that the statute grants the CDC the sweeping authority that it asserts, the opinion said. The CDC said its ban applied to renters who otherwise would likely need to move or congregate or shared living settings, move to congregate or shared living settings where COVID-19 spreads quickly and easily, or would be rendered homeless and forced into shelters or other settings that would increase their susceptibility to COVID. Breyer wrote in his dissent that the CDC's judgment should be respected and said that the majority's summary disposal of the case was unwarranted. It raises contested legal questions about the important federal statute on which the lower courts are split and on which this court has never actually spoken, Breyer wrote. These questions call for considered decision-making informed by full briefing and argument. The moratorium did not wipe away any rental bills for people who had fallen behind on payment. To address that need, Congress allocated $46.5 billion in emergency rental assistance, but the distribution of the money has been painfully slow. Technical glitches dogged online systems. Landlords and tenants without internet had even more trouble applying for aid. The amount of money that has actually reached people is a fraction of the $46.5 billion appointed by Congress. Appropriated by Congress. Of the $25 billion appropriated in December, state and local programs spent about $5.1 billion between January and the end of July, according to figures released Wednesday by the Treasury Department. A March relief package provided the other $21.5 billion. About $108 million of that bucket has been spent as of June. Last month, nearly $1.7 billion was spent on rent, utilities, and missed payments for vulnerable households, according to the Treasury Department data. That's only a slight uptick from the $1.5 billion that was disbursed in June, despite intense pressure on the Biden administration and local officials to ramp up the spending before July 31st, when the initial CDC moratorium expired. The White House implored state and local governments, courts, legal aid organizations, and community groups to do all they could to slow track evictions and help keep people in their homes. But many housing advocates said the administration took too long to direct so much public attention towards the looming eviction crisis. As the Delta variant spread and the coronavirus cases soared, administration officials scrambled to offer an explanation of how the moratorium would be allowed to expire with so much rental aid still untapped. With its August order, the CDC aimed to temporarily halt evictions in areas experiencing an increase in the COVID cases, citing a significant transmission of the Delta variant. The agency said at the time that more than 80% of U.S. counties were classified as experiencing substantial or high levels of community transmission. It's estimated that about 6 million renters remain behind on payments, according to Moody's. Depending on where they live, tenants may still be protected by state or municipal bans or restrictions on who may be evicted. Tenants in at least 8 states and D.C. will have some pandemic-related protections through the end of August, but those could be threatened too. Supreme Court earlier this month lifted part of New York's pandemic-related ban on residential evictions, siding with a group of landlords who said their rights were being violated. The CDC case is Alabama Association of Realtors versus Department of Health and Human Services. That right there, the Supreme Court case that lifted part of New York's pandemic ban, we talked about that in episode 84. We're on 86 now, so that would have been 2 weeks ago on episode 84 that we talked about that. So there were a few things I highlighted in this article that I just want to go back and touch base on. first of which being this right here. Brings an end to an unlawful policy that places financial hardship solely on the shoulders of mom-and-pop housing providers who provide nearly half of all rental housing in America, and it restores property rights in America. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's not nearly half of all rental housing, it's more than half of all rental housing in America. Something like 75% of all property owners only own 1 to 2 rental properties, and typically that's going to be someone who bought a home and then had to move away for work and has a rental property as a result, or someone who inherited a property from a family member that passed away, something along those lines. You know, more often than not, it's not somebody who bought just one rental and decided to stop at just one rental. It's somebody who inherited a property or is stuck with a property due to a move, and they've decided to use that property as a rental, and now they're in a position where if they have a non-paying tenant, they're probably also behind on their mortgage and at risk of losing the property that the tenant is in and maybe even the property that they live in. So that's kind of a nasty situation to start with. I went ahead and did it, Biden told reporters. But here's the deal. I can't guarantee you that the court won't rule that we don't have the authority, but at least we'll have the ability, if we appeal, to keep this going for a month at least, and I hope longer than that. That pretty clearly tells me that Biden knew, and everybody in Biden's camp knew, that they really didn't have a leg to stand on when they put this new moratorium into place. And realistically speaking, I don't think that there's ever really been much of a leg to stand on for any of the CDC moratoriums, especially based on the information that's being covered in this article. But obviously they went ahead and did it anyway, acting illegally despite the fact that they knew that what they were doing wasn't right. The only plausible explanation for the extended moratorium is that it was issued in response to political pressure from Capitol Hill for the express purpose of using litigation delays to distribute more rental assistance. Yeah, we called that back when they started extending it. That was one of the first things I said, is that the eviction moratoriums are being extended simply because they need more time to roll out this aid. And they still haven't rolled out the aid. I have applications in the New York State ERAP system that were that were processed by the tenant and processed by us early on in the month of June. Like first week of June, we had applications that were processed. Every application that we have is still sitting in pending status. And when we talk to New York State, they tell us everything is in on your end, everything is in on the tenant's end, it's just waiting to be reviewed by a caseworker. Where are these caseworkers and what files are they reviewing? Because it doesn't seem as though they're doing a whole lot to get these funds out the door. Scrolling down a little bit, the moratorium did not wipe away rental bills for people who had fallen behind on payment. There seems to be this running thought process that, oh, rents are just being forgiven. No, that is not the case. Your rent is still due and payable every single month. The moratorium, none of the moratoriums here in New York State or at the federal level have wiped away anyone's past due balance, at least not to the best of my knowledge. To address the need, Congress allocated $46.5 billion in emergency rental assistance, but the distribution of the money's been painfully slow. Of the $25 billion appropriated in December, state and local programs spent about $5.1 billion between January and the end of July. That's 20.4%, by the way. 20.4%. According to figures released Wednesday by the Treasury Department, a March relief package provided the other $21.5 billion. About $108 million of that bucket has been spent as of June. That's 0.005%. 0.005%. Check my math, I might be wrong, but that's the math that I got when I did it here this morning prepping for the show. If you sit and combine the $46.5 billion in total appropriated funds, and then you factor that against the actual amount that's been spent, the $5.1 billion, and then the other $108 million, you come up with a total of 11.2% of these funds have been able to be distributed between January and I think these statistics are through the end of July. We don't have August yet since August just ended. You're talking about January, February, March, April, May, June, and July. You're talking about 7 months they've been trying to roll these funds out, and they've still only managed to distribute 11.2%. Frankly, I think that the rollout of this was handled completely inappropriately, and I know I've talked about this in the past, and I know I'm starting to get long-winded on this article. I apologize, but I feel passionate about this because I understand what the impact is to people who were waiting on these funds. Getting back into things here, looking at the way that this has been handled, you already had a Section 8 program, a nationwide Section 8 program that sole purpose is to receive federal funds, funnel those funds down to the people that need them, and distribute those funds back out. You already had that program in place. Why didn't you use the federal programs that are already in place and being administered at a local level rather than pushing the federal funds to the states and telling them to figure it out? Because most of the states had to design these programs from scratch. They didn't have something already in place to make for the smooth transfer of these funds. I'm not necessarily saying that Section 8 would have been the smoothest, but it sure as hell would have been better than reinventing the wheel, which is essentially what they did to distribute these funds. It was a stupid decision at every level, and I have a feeling that it was made on purpose or made by people who don't understand the industry that they're regulating. Could be a little bit of both, to be honest with you. The White House implored state and local governments, courts, and legal organizations and community groups to do all they could to slow track evictions and keep people in their homes. Not even going to comment further on that. I think it's pretty clear. That's that article. I wanted to cover it. I knew I wanted to spend some time on it because these eviction moratoriums, they're a big issue. And we're going to move on to our next article here. Now that the federal eviction moratorium has been, knocked down, we have a new governor here in the state of New York, and she is looking to extend the state eviction moratorium, which ended yesterday, August 31st at midnight. So this is going to essentially be meet the new boss, same as the old boss. There's not a lot of information on this yet. This is breaking news and it has not yet passed. We're probably going to wind up doing a special edition episode once more information about this is available. This one comes to us via rochesterfirst.com and this was published overnight. Governor Hochul assembles legislators to consider extending the eviction moratorium. Let's see if we can enlarge our text here. Governor Kathy Hochul announced she would call legislators back to the state capitol to discuss lengthening the state eviction moratorium to mid-January. It's my goal to expand the eviction moratorium to expand rental assistance programs from today to January 15th, 2022, New York governor said Tuesday evening. We all know that landlords are struggling and we need to protect small businesses as well. According to the governor, they'll also chat about a few key issues, including appointments to newly developed state cannabis board, as well as changes to the open meetings law the governor says will help them continue virtually. The moratorium was set to expire midnight Tuesday. We are less than 16 hours from when we're supposed to debate on this bill, and we have not seen the bill language yet, said Assemblyman Josh Jensen, who will be on his way back to the Capital Region early Wednesday morning from northwest Monroe County. Jensen told News 8 he wants to see the specific language of the eviction bill. He says that the past plan got it wrong, making the process to get rent relief for landlords too complicated. I think if the bill is fundamentally the same as what we passed earlier this year, I don't think it will be effective, he said. Hochul asserted Tuesday night that the moratorium was scheduled to expire. The extension is necessary. We're not going to allow for people who, through no fault of their own, lost income, not able to pay, and facing eviction, said Hochul. We're not going to allow that to happen in the great state of New York. Like I said, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. It looks like this is going to get extended. They're talking about to January 15th, 2022. We don't know what this bill language is going to look like. The legislature doesn't even know what this bill is going to look like yet. Obviously, this article was published last night. Very frustrating when the people who are supposed to be acting in our best interests and legislating on our behalf are not even receiving the language of the bills they're supposed to be debating and voting on until the very last minute. That's part of the reason that I have so many issues with these eviction moratoriums. They're not being thought out. They're being rushed. They're being handled by people who don't understand the industry that they're legislating. And this is why we've wound up with as many problems as we have. So I'm sure we'll hear more on this later today. Keep watch of our channel and our Facebook page for more information on this. More than likely, we will wind up doing a special episode between now and next week's show just to give you an update on this. But at the very least, by next Wednesday, we should have a good picture of what's going on, and we'll be able to update you at that point. That's enough about eviction moratoriums. Let's try to find something at least a little bit funnier to look at. This one is from OSHA. If you ever think to yourself, I wonder if that's an OSHA violation, it's safe to assume that it's actually multiple OSHA violations. And I'm going to go ahead on a limb here and say, yeah, this image probably ties directly to that last image. I don't like working on scaffolding to start with. It always makes me a little bit uneasy, but when you look at a scaffolding that's set up like that, holy cow, man. You couldn't pay me enough to get onto that thing. So something a little bit lighter just to kind of break up the negative news that we had here this week. We're going to jump into some questions from housing providers around the country now. Buying a home with asbestos siding. Hello, I just signed a contract for a house and just found out it has asbestos siding. Does anybody have experience with this? I really appreciate any points of view. I'm thinking on backing off. So there's nothing inherently wrong with asbestos siding. I'm going to start by saying I'm not an asbestos expert, and you should probably talk to somebody that knows more about this than I do, but I can give you a little bit of general info here. Asbestos siding was very prevalent on older homes and in some areas of the country. It's actually incredibly sturdy and it lasts for a very, very long time. But obviously it's asbestos, and we now understand that asbestos does come with some health risks. Generally speaking, as long as it's in good condition and not falling apart, it's fine. The goal is to disturb it as little as possible. I'm going to pull up a couple pictures here so you can take a look at what some asbestos siding looks like while I'm talking. And essentially, the goal is to disturb it as little as possible. No drilling into a wall to hang a satellite dish or something like that. You know, you can see in the tiles in the upper left corner here, those are obviously cracked. That does start to create a condition where the asbestos material can start to become airborne, but the bigger concern would be when it creates dust or when you have an opportunity for fibers to be released. That's when you have an issue. If you're looking at that lower right photo, that's a much larger concern than that upper left photo, essentially because just wiping your finger across the edge of that tile, that broken tile in the lower right, you're going to start releasing those fibers into the air, and that's when asbestos is dangerous, is when the fibers are released into the air. When you do have to deal with it, you may be able to cover or encapsulate it, or you may be required to remove it. You're going to want to talk to your town's building department about that. You may want to get a quote or two if this is a major concern for you, but encapsulating it will definitely be cheaper than paying to have the removal and disposal if it's permitted in your area. My recommendation would be talk to your building department, maybe get a couple of quotes if it's something that's a major issue for you. But realistically speaking, asbestos siding is something that as long as it's in good shape and as long as it doesn't look like those tiles there where they're either cracked or broken or where the asbestos is going to be in a situation where it could become airborne, generally speaking, you should be okay with asbestos siding. On to our next one, screen every adult resident. Hello, I have a question I'm hoping to get some answers on. So a prospective tenant wants to rent from me and says his brother will be living there from time to time. He has a job that takes him out of town quite a bit. So he wants to put the rental in just his name and not in his brother's name. I told him that was okay as long as he makes enough money to pay for the rent himself. However, I did ask for an application from his brother along with his so I can check him out. I'd like any opinions or any advice that you may have. Thank you. So my first concern here is that time to time is a very, very vague statement, and I'm betting it's going to look more like full-time than like part-time. Either way, you should vet everyone who's going to be living in the apartment over the age of 18. Full applicant screening on both. Include the credit and background checks, do the income verification, talk to previous landlord references, the full boat. Make sure you screen these tenants from top to bottom. Stick to your qualification criteria. Make sure you're using a good, consistent set of criteria every single time. You might be able to head off a major headache before it becomes one simply by screening these tenants. You never know. This brother that they're trying to put in and not put him on the lease, he may have some kind of a less than stellar past or something like that that you need to be aware of before you rent the apartment to them. My opinion is that you should always put all parties on the lease as responsible parties, and that you should also have language in your lease holding both parties both jointly and severally liable. This helps to protect you as the housing provider in a few different ways. First, if one of the tenants disappears, you still have the other tenant that you can go after individually. You can also go after both tenants jointly, and you have the ability to pursue either or. You can go after one to try to get your damages and debts covered, or you can go after both. And if you get an award against one, I believe that the award counts against both because it is jointly and severally liable. So my opinion, if you're going to do this, put both of them on the lease as responsible parties. I would not make one just an occupant. I would make both of them responsible parties in this because it's going to protect you as the housing provider. Just make sure you have that language on being jointly and severally liable. Question number 3, interior design and painting tips with Drew. The question that no one wanted the answer to. How many landlords paint walls, trim, and doors the same on their rentals? It seems so much easier to touch up. So this question makes it sound like you're going to walk into a room, drop a 5-gallon bucket of paint in the middle of it, grab a paint sprayer, and just go to town, spray everything. Please don't do that. I know that there are a lot of people who think it's so much faster, there's no cut-in required, whatever, you wind up looking, the apartment winds up looking terrible. Like, doing something like that and just overspraying everything, not pulling any sort of covers or, switch plate covers, outlet covers, just going over everything, makes the entire apartment look cheap. And it will decrease the amount of rent that you get for that apartment. Take the time to paint properly, and the end result is going to be so much better. As for doing one tone throughout an entire apartment, I strongly recommend against that as well, especially if it's plain white box. We used to have a client that insisted that all of his apartments be plain white box. And consistently, his apartments rented slower and for less money than for apartments that had color on the walls. And it didn't even have to be, bright, vivid colors. The problem was his white boxes. It looked like a damn rental. It looked boring. Put some beige, some gray, some neutrals, some earth tones on the walls. Everybody has their own opinion of what colors should be used. I recommend doing one color on the walls, and I recommend doing a different color on the trim if you're painting the trim. But realistically speaking, go for the neutrals, the earth tones, whatever. Avoid the passion pink, the plum happy purple, the burnt sienna, the chartreuse. All of those are real colors, by the way. You can go find them on Sherwin-Williams' website. The bright, vivid colors, that's where you're going to have issues and you're going to be turning people off to your rental. So going all the way bland is going to be boring and turn people off. Going too far the other direction with bright, vivid colors is probably going to turn some people off as well. My recommendation is a nice two-tone. Do your walls in one of the earth tones. If you're painting your trim, do it in, a white or something like that. I know there are people out there screaming right now about painting trim white. If you have natural woodwork, please keep your natural woodwork. Do what you can to restore it if it's restorable, whatever the case may be. If you're putting brand new trim on or something like that, chances are it's already going to be pre-painted in a white. You can get it just as a raw wood product, but if you've got the pre-painted white, obviously you're just going to throw white paint on that. So, if you have the natural woodwork, please do preserve it. You lose a lot of character when you paint woodwork. We try to avoid it whenever possible. As far as recommendations on paint types, I recommend eggshell on the walls. I recommend semi-gloss on trim and doors. The reason we go for eggshell on the walls is because generally speaking, it's a little bit easier to touch up. You don't wind up with the flash that you would off of a semi-gloss or something like that. But realistically speaking, anytime you do a touch-up on a wall, you're probably going to notice that spot until it blends back into the wall. If you're using the same color paint, you can paint an entire wall pretty quickly if you have a lot of touch-ups. And then suddenly all of those touch-ups blend in because your stop point is the corners of the room, so it just makes it easier for everything to blend in. Once you have a home that's on whatever color palette you choose, my recommendation is to keep that same color palette throughout any other rentals that you have as well, so that you can keep paint in stock. You can buy 5-gallon buckets of paint when it's on sale. Just remix it as you need it to go onto a wall or onto trim or whatever the case may be. But if you have that nice consistent color across your entire portfolio, it does make it a lot easier for you to store paint, use paint in multiple locations, and keep things running a little bit smoother. You might have a consistent paint color and then maybe a crazy accent color or something like that. You might even want to keep that consistent across properties too, just to make your life a little bit easier as your portfolio grows. That pretty much wraps things up for this week's episode of Ask a Property Manager. Thank you all so much for watching. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can definitely help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments either on Facebook or YouTube, and your question may be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if we brought some value to your day, do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week on Wednesday, September 8th at 10 a.m. Eastern with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.